Hello, grade 10. Welcome to a new reading comprehension lesson. Today we will be taking a new theme, which is called human rights. And the lesson is Lebanon, Steps to Improve Women's Rights. First of all, before we proceed, we need to know what the term human rights actually refers to. So you need to know what the basic human rights are, or what we mean when we say basic human rights. What are they? Okay, they are the right to have a family, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of thought, the right to have an education, the right to security, etc. Those are the basic human rights, and of course I will show them to you in the next slide. Those human rights, universal human rights, when we say universal, it means that they apply to all the countries in the world, okay? When and where were these human rights agreed upon? How do we know that this is a basic human right? This is a basic human right. How do we know that? When did people agree on that? And how many nations sign this agreement? Number 3, how do you view the implementation of human rights in your country with regards to women? Which ones are upheld, which women's rights are upheld, and which ones aren't? Of course, we know Lebanon, as in many developing countries, women's rights are not at their optimum. And even in several Western countries, they're still striving for equality between men and women. They're not there yet. So let's answer those questions one by one. What are the basic human rights? Of course, there are several more, but I chose the basic ones. Right to marriage and a family. Right to own your own things. Freedom of thought. Freedom of expression. You can also refer to it as freedom of speech. Say what you want without being punished. The right to public assembly, meaning you can, of course, adults in a society can assemble and protest something which they believe is unfair. And of course, these protests need to be, if they are a right, they need to be held in a peaceful way. Protesting violently violates another human right. You cannot be protesting something that violates your right and be violent at the same time. So the right to, of course, peaceful public assembly. The right to democracy. What do we mean by democracy? Democracy is when people vote for members of the government, okay? They choose their own leaders. Democracy. Demo means people. Cracy, okay, means the rule. The rule in a democracy, the people rule because they are the ones who vote for their own leaders and governments. Workers' rights, of course, workers, this has been agreed on. They have specific hours. There is a minimum salary that needs to be a base from which the employers go. They cannot go below this minimum salary, and they cannot go above the maximum number of hours. Of course, whether or not these are upheld is another thing. The right to food and shelter. Shelter means a safe place. The right to education, the right for free and compulsory education. Every child has the right to be educated. Security, of course, to be secure in times of war or in times of protest or in times of crises, which several of are going on in the world nowadays. Now, number 2, when and where were the above mentioned rights agreed upon? Okay, the universal, we call it the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is when the human rights were declared. Is a historical document that was adopted by the UN, United Nations General Assembly, on December 10, 1948 in Paris, France. 100, how many countries signed it? I asked that. 192 countries, including our own, including Lebanon, signed this declaration. Meaning, if you signed this declaration, you have to uphold the basic human rights that you agreed upon. Okay? These rights do not distinguish between genders, whether you're male or female. They give full and equal rights to both the males and the females. Now, how do you view the implementation of those rights in your country with regards to women? Okay, I'm talking specifically about this. Which ones are upheld and which ones aren't? Women in Lebanon do have certain rights, like the right to vote and the right to own property. They can own land, apartments, cars, etc. However, when it comes to their civil rights, for example, like having full custody of their child in case there is a divorce or in case the husband dies, the woman does not have custody or full custody of her child, or she also is not allowed to give citizenship to their children. So if a Lebanese woman marries a person from another nationality, she cannot give him or her children her nationality. Okay? So, moreover, laws regarding domestic violence in Lebanon are somewhat lax. They're weak and incomplete. What do we mean by domestic violence? We mean that the violence that women might face at home, like being hit or being talked to in a violent way. Of course, domestic violence can be both physical and psychological. It doesn't just need to be physical. So here, the laws are totally not in favor of women in Lebanon. Now, there is also the controversial issue of domestic workers, the workers that are employed at home, okay, whom at many times are treated as slaves rather than employees. They might be locked up in a house. When the owners of the house go out, they would lock her in. She's not allowed to go out on her own. She doesn't have a day where she doesn't have a day where she goes out like a Sunday or so. And with many human rights organizations viewing the kafala system as inhuman. What do we mean by the kafala system? If you want a domestic worker in Lebanon, you need to order her from a place like Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. When you order her, you are the kafil. We call this the kafala system. And it's basically like you own this person. Okay, she is at your house. You can lock her. People don't know how she is treated. Her family doesn't know how she is treated. Many of her freedoms are taken away from her. So this is a controversial issue in Lebanon, which many human rights organizations nowadays are talking about. Now, after that, okay, I introduced the basic idea of the lesson. Now I want to give you the reading skills which will help you better understand the lesson and, of course, answer the comprehension questions that will be given. In this unit, we will be taking 3 new reading skills and strategies: paraphrasing, summarizing, and audience. Okay, let's go through them one by one. What do we mean by paraphrasing? Of course, since grade 9 and even before that, we know that when you are given a certain sentence or text to paraphrase, it means you need to explain it in simpler forms using your own words. How do we paraphrase? Formally, okay, on an exam, or maybe later on the official exam in grade 12 when you are asked to paraphrase. How should you paraphrase? I need to train you for that since this moment, okay? You are 10th graders on the exams. You have to paraphrase this way. The first step, of course, would be read the original text carefully. 2, you have to cite the source. Where is this source? This sentence or this paragraph, where did you take it from? Okay. 3rd, you need to use 3rd person, they, them, he, she. You did not use I, okay? Of course, you need to make it simpler. You need to use simpler terminology, simpler synonyms. 5, change the sentence structure. Do not write it in the same order as it was written in the original text, okay? Let's see an example here. This is the original text, which I want you to paraphrase. Virtual education, meaning the education we are doing right now, has become the new trend today, especially with the emergence of COVID-19, which has not left educators any choice but to benefit from its convenience during this highly contagious pandemic. Okay, how can we paraphrase that? Let's see. First of all, citation. There is no article or paragraph number. If this is the case, you just write the following. In the text above, this is your citation. The author explains that. You have to write this. This is your step 2. After you read very carefully, you cite the source. In the above text, the author explains that. Okay, because, notice how I changed the sentence structure even. Because of the fast spread of the COVID-19 epidemic. Fast spread instead of highly contagious. Contagious means a disease that spreads from one person to another. Okay. Of the COVID-19 epidemic, which is a pandemic, a disease that spreads from one person to another, people in education, instead of educators, had to increasingly resort to online education, online instead of virtual, because it is a safe and practical way to reach and teach students without spreading the virus. Okay, so we made it simpler. We explained it in simpler terminology, and it's longer, and we changed the sentence structure. When you finish, of course, reread it and see if it makes sense. Okay, so this is what paraphrasing is. Okay, now summarizing. Summarizing is the opposite of paraphrasing. In paraphrasing, we explain something, we make it longer. Now, summarizing, we just pick the main idea of this whole paragraph or text that we are giving. So, summarizing is defined as taking a lot of information and making a shorter, condensed version of that information, keeping only the main point or points. Steps for summarizing, the first steps are the same. Of course, we have to read very carefully. Citation, for example, this is an example of citation. In paragraph 3 of the text entitled Human Rights Violations in Congo, the author explains that. This is what I mean by citation. See it? 3, use third person, of course. Use your own words, and main ideas only, drop the details. On a test or a quiz, summarizing questions will be asked in one of 2 ways, shown in the next slide. Please observe them well. So, a good summary would be, of course, this is not a good summary. Spending too much time sitting has its adverse impact on health, with an increased chance of disease such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes. This is just half of what is said. The other half says that, however, adding physical activity to your day will have a good impact on your health. So we can say spending too much time sitting has adverse impacts on health, with an increased chance of diseases such as cardiovascular diseases and diabetes, comma. However, if you practice 1 hour of physical activity daily, you will put off or decrease your chances of developing such chronic or dangerous diseases, full stop. Okay, here it's a poor version because it only talked about half of what the author stated. We want the other half all in one sentence. Okay, the next The next skill we're going to talk about is audience. Now, what is audience? In reading comprehension, the audience is the person or the group of people whom the writer intends to address or talk to in the text. For example, the article we're going to read now about women's rights in Lebanon, who is it addressed to? Who is the author likely talking to? Could he be talking to the government, to the women's rights group, to women themselves? Okay, so when a writer makes an article or comes up with a piece of writing, they have an audience, a target group in mind. How can I ask you such a question? Name 2 types of audience who might be interested in reading the article Adolescent Sleep Cycles and School Timing. What is their interest? When I'm talking about the sleep cycle of adolescents and how it is disturbed and how they need longer hours of sleep, remember we talked about that? Who is the author addressing? After having read the article, you can come up with a good idea. This is how we answer. Parents of teenagers would be interested in reading the above article in order to gain more awareness about their teen child sleeping cycles. Okay, moreover, school administrations, meaning the people who are in charge of the school, the principal, the supervisors, the administration, will be interested in reading this article to plan schedules that would be in accordance with teenagers' educational well-being. So this would be a perfect answer. 2 target groups, 2 types of audience. Again, a different type of question. Whom do you think the author is addressing? Addressing means talking to in this article. Identify 1 major type of reader and specify their interest in the above article. Answer. In the above article, the author is most likely addressing school administrations because they are the ones in charge of laying out the schedules or putting schedules. When reading this article backed by supporting evidence, they might find it in the best interest of their teen students to make the starting bell a little later than it previously was for both middle and high school students. Okay, I gave the type of audience and I justified my answer. I stated the reason for their interest in this article. Okay, now before we start reading the article, I would like to go through some vocab words with you in order to understand the text better. Number 1, Human Rights Watch. This is a human rights organization. Okay, this is its name. It's a non-governmental organization, meaning it's not related to the government, it's not directed by the government, that works to advance the cause of human rights in the world. It is guided by international human rights laws. So that's Human Rights Watch. Just like Greenpeace, just like UN, it's an organization. Parliament. Remember, we talked about Parliament and you guys addressed Parliament in your essay during the semester exam. The branch of government where laws are made and passed. 3, incremental. There have been incremental advances in human rights in Lebanon, very small, in increments. Landmark. Okay, this was a landmark discovery. The COVID-19 vaccine is a landmark discovery, an event or discovery marking an important stage or a turning point. Okay, domestic. When we talk about domestic, we mean at home, related to the household. For example, a domestic worker. When we talk about domestic violence, domestic animals, like the pets you keep at home. Repealed, cancelled. Permit, allow. Grant, give. They were granted the right to citizenship. Migrant. Migrant is a person who travels outside his or her country seeking a better life. Amend, improve or change to the better. Crisis, a disaster or catastrophe. Assistance, help. escalated, increased rapidly, vulnerable, weak. Children and women are vulnerable groups during times of war. Crucial means very important, essential. Malnutrition is lack of proper nutrition, lack of proper eating caused by not having enough to eat. Okay, now we can begin our lesson. The article is called Lebanon, Steps to Improve Women's Rights. This was adapted from an article by Human Rights Watch written on March 8, 2018. Okay, let's read the blurb. Read the following article from Human Rights Watch, a non-governmental organization, about the important steps that have to be taken in Lebanon in order to improve the rights of women in the country. Then answer the questions that follow. Beirut. Candidates running in Lebanon's May 6, 2018 parliamentary elections, meaning elections that lead you to the parliament, you are representing the people, should commit to several key steps to improve women's rights, Human Rights Watch said today on International Women's Day. Political parties should also ensure greater participation of women in parliament by including women on their candidate lists. We know in Lebanon we have this list system where there are several candidates running for parliament. Okay, most of the time women are either absent or found, or you may find in a list of 15 people one or a maximum of 2 women. So what Human Rights Watch is saying that more women should be included in this list in order to arrive to the parliament and represent people. Paragraph 2, Lebanon has made some positive incremental changes. There have been changes, but very small, in recent years towards protecting women's rights, but is behind other countries in the region in some respects. In 2014, Parliament adopted a landmark or breakthrough law on domestic violence, but it defined domestic violence too narrowly and failed to criminalize some violent activities at home. So it did not include all the violent activities which might take place at home, so it's missing. In 2017, Parliament repealed or cancelled Article 522 of the Criminal Code, which had allowed rapists to escape prosecution by marrying their victim, but left a loophole for cases concerning cases where young girls are seduced with the promise of marriage. Paragraph 3. Despite some recent reforms, Lebanon's laws still explicitly permit violence and discrimination against women, said Lama Fakir, Deputy Middle East Director at Human Rights Watch. Parliamentary candidates should show they are serious about women's rights by promising to take serious and specific steps to fix laws that are failing women. Paragraph 4. Lebanon should abolish inequality under personal status laws and grant citizenship to children of Lebanese mothers, abolish child marriage, ban all forms of domestic violence and human trafficking, and protect the rights of migrant domestic workers, the one we just talked about. Okay, now personal status and nationality law. Nationality means citizenship. Lebanon has no civil code covering issues such as divorce, property rights, or care of children. Instead, 15 separate religious laws govern personal status issues. These laws all discriminate against women and non-guarantee basic rights. Autonomous religious courts administer these laws with little or no government oversight, often issuing rulings that violate women's rights. And unlike Lebanese men, Lebanese women cannot pass on their nationality to their children or foreign husbands. Parliamentary candidates should commit to passing a civil personal status law that would guarantee that all citizens are treated equally and amend Lebanon's nationality law to ensure that Lebanese women can pass on their citizenship to their children. Algeria, Egypt, Mauritania, Morocco, Tunisia, and Yemen already provide equal rights to women and men to confer nationality to their children. So in this case, we are behind all those countries. Okay? Paragraph 6, by ceding personal status matters to religious courts without guarantees of basic equality or oversight, Parliament has utterly failed to protect women's rights, Faki said. It is outrageous that Lebanese women cannot pass on this citizenship to their children, arbitrarily depriving children of citizenship and leaving some at risk of statelessness, meaning they don't have a citizenship at all. Child marriage, also an issue we talked about earlier this year. Lebanon has no national minimum age of marriage. Okay, we all know that. Instead, religious courts set the age based on the personal status laws, meaning the religious courts. There is no, you don't go and get married in civil court. You have to get married through a religious person, a clergyman, some of which allow girls under age 15 to marry. Parliament members have introduced multiple bills to set the national minimum age for marriage at 18. We see many, by the way, many awareness campaigns taking place, but this law has not been passed yet. Though some would allow for marriage at 16 with the judge's approval, but Parliament has not passed this legislation. The word legislation means law. So there is no law for a minimum age marriage in Lebanon. Candidates, meaning those running for office at the Parliament, should make a commitment to pass a law to set 18 as the national minimum marriage age. Lebanon is behind many countries in the region that have set 18 as the minimum marriage age, including Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Libya, Morocco, Oman, Tunisia, and the United Arab Emirates. All of those have laws against marrying at an age less than 18. Early marriage can have dire, miserable, lifelong consequences and can often spell the end of a girl's education and leave her at heightened risk of domestic violence, exploitation, meaning used, and a range of health problems, Faki said. It is inexcusable that Parliament has not stepped in to protect girls and end the current mess of inconsistent and inadequate laws, meaning that the laws are not enough for women in Lebanon. Okay, guys, notice how the author divided the article into subcategories using subtitles, okay? The reason the author does that, and this is a skill you learned at the beginning of the year, is to organize the ideas in the text and make it easier for the reader to know what's going to happen. So obviously we know that in paragraph 10, the author is going to be talking about domestic violence and harassment. Paragraph 11 is going to be talking about migrant domestic workers, okay? Paragraph 10, a landmark 2014 domestic violence law established important protection measures and related policing and court reforms. But the law defines domestic violence narrowly and failed to specifically criminalize some violent acts at home. It also does not require religious courts to adhere to civil court rulings related to domestic violence, leaving women trapped in abusive marriages. Some religious courts issue obedience and cohabitation rulings against women, requiring them to return to the marital home. So there have been laws, but again and again, as the author says here, the laws have done some either incremental changes or haven't done something major at all. Okay, and women are still being stuck in this violent cycle. Paragraph 11 now, migrant domestic workers, those who work at home. An estimated 250,000 migrant domestic workers in Lebanon, the majority of them women, are excluded from labor law. There is no law relating to them, protections, and often left out of the women's rights debate. Lebanon has become an outlier on this issue, as most of the major countries of destination for migrant domestic workers have instituted such laws. The kafala or sponsorship system subjects migrant domestic workers to restrictive rules under which they cannot leave or change jobs without their employer or sponsor's consent, placing them at risk of exploitation and abuse. Like at many times, or most of the times when a domestic worker comes to your house, she immediately has to give you her passport. So she even cannot hold on to her own passport. Many times they do not give her the money to hold on to herself. Okay? And as we said, she cannot go out as she wishes to. She cannot leave this particular sponsor or kafil. Candidates should promise to extend labor law protections to domestic workers and to reform the kafala sponsorship system so that workers' visas are no longer tied to individual sponsors and so that they can leave their job without the sponsor's consent. So she cannot come to the country without the sponsor, the person who she's going to work with. And she cannot leave the country without the sponsor going to the government offices and telling that she is leaving. Okay, so she is stuck. We have for years documented reports of rampant abuses against migrant domestic workers in Lebanon, and these women deserve the same protection as everyone else, Faqih said. Parliamentary candidates should put an end to a legal framework that facilitates their exploitation and abuse. Okay, so this is all for today's lecture. I would like you guys to reread it carefully, of course, and please go to the school application in order to access the worksheet for this lesson. It is also found on page 66 of your ebook, the exercises, of course, but you need to read the text first. I want you to answer exercises A until F, with the exception of number 4 in exercise B. Okay, thank you all for listening and hoping to see you soon. Bye bye.